Okay, welcome everybody in the room in Glasgow in the new Trade Union Centre. As people who have seen us getting organised for the last couple of minutes realise, it is a new Trade Union Centre, but we do hope that everyone out there can hear us loud and clear. And I imagine everyone in here, because I've got a loud voice, can hear us loud and clear. I'm Dave Moxon, I'm Deputy General Secretary at the STUC. You're going to hear from a much more important person and people than me in a minute. But I do have to do a little bit of housekeeping to start with. Obviously, that's for people within the room. People remotely will have their own health and safety arrangements, I'm sure. But we should say there's no fire alarm tests planned for today. So if there is a fire alarm, it will be the real thing. And if so, you should leave immediately through the nearest exit. The assembly point is at the dead end of the street beside the bollards. STUC staff, and you'll see there's lots of us here, will be here to assist you in the evacuation of the building. We do ask you to keep your masks on at all times unless you're medically exempt, but of course they can be removed when you're actually making a contribution to the meeting. You know the habits we get into. If people need any water, there isn't any food and drink inside today, but if people need water, there is water available at reception. But we also do have a tap in the kitchen of potable water if people prefer that. Hopefully people have seen the Wi-Fi password. It's displayed around the room, and we've got copies of it here if anyone doesn't have that yet. And just for people again in the room, there's a one-way system that you'll have seen, and it's clearly signposted for getting around the building. So that's everything on the health and safety side. I'm really delighted. This is one of the first meetings that the STUC has held, and I think we're going to now move over to Irene, who's going to run through the agenda for the meeting. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today, and welcome everyone in the room. It's great to actually be in a physical space together and getting a chance to see each other in person. I've only seen on Zoom for many months. So it's great to be here, and thanks to the STUC for holding us in this new building. It's very exciting to get a chance to actually be in the new space here. Oh, I can. Okay, great. So I just want to run through the agenda, and also I want to welcome the 70 people that are online right now with us, joining from all over the world, from Turkey to the Ukraine to the Philippines to South Africa, and we will hear from some of those people later today. And yes, if you would like to post a greeting into the chat, please do. It's exciting that we get together like this. So I just want to run through the agenda quickly. We have a full day with really exciting speakers, and we're going to start by hearing a welcome and introduction from Ross Foyer, who's the General Secretary of STUC, and then we will move into sort of the process and objectives of what has gone on over the last period in regards to what we're calling the Interim Report, which I think a number of you, if not all of you, have heard about at this point, and more will be discussed about that. Then we will hear an overview of the program that was shared with you online, and that is a program, a distillation of some key points from this report. And after that, we'll hear a summary of the actual interim report and a little bit more about the program. Then we will take a 15-minute break. I should mention that we have some incredible interpreters that have been working with us for a long time, offering interpretation in English, French, English, and Spanish. And so when we speak, if you could speak slowly, that would be very helpful. So we'll take a 15-minute break to give the interpreters a break and us also a break from Zoom. Then we are going to hear responses to the content of the program, and we have a really fantastic lineup, some of who will be joining us in person here in the room today, and then others who will be joining us online from other parts of the world. Then we're going to take a much longer break, 40 minutes, so that people can actually get some food and drink in this community. Just around the corner, there's places, and we can show you how to get there. And then people can, have a little space to sit down and actually eat. And then those online can have a little bit of a break away from the computer. And then we're going to really get into this discussion, which I think many of us have been waiting for, about this program and thinking about the strategy and the next steps of how we want to take hold of the program, the interim report, and think about how to organize and mobilize our unions and allies around the contents. And then we'll hear a bit of a closing, and then we'll end the meeting. So that's the rundown. And I want to just thank and appreciate everybody for your patience. This has been a very complicated process, including the organizers and the tech people that have helped us try and set up the space here today, and all of the complicated issues that we have to deal with around COVID precautions, as well as hybrid meetings. So thanks everybody for that, and your commitment to this process, and for being here today. So I'll leave it at that, and I will hand it over to Sean.
Great. It's a little strange, but I'm Sean Sweeney. I coordinate trade unions for energy democracy. In terms of the program, what we're referring to today is not the agenda for today, but the actual program that's under discussion, the program for a public low carbon energy future. That you've got the link in front of you, so it'll be very helpful if you can get it up on your screens and participate in the discussion by going to the Zoom link. And the interim report is basically unfinished, but it will be finalized in the early months of 2022. All being well, it's a mammoth document, and we think it's the most, in my view anyway, and we'll talk more about this later, it's the most rigorous critique of neoliberal energy and climate policy from a trade union perspective that has probably ever been produced. And secondly, it begins to offer a framework for an alternative that goes beyond slogans and principles, but actually says what reclaimed public companies can do, should do, and will do. So that's the sort of the essentials of what we're trying to do today. And as Irene said, to build support for the program and to turn it into a sort of some kind of initiative where they will take hold in the trade union movement, and also influence other social movements that we believe are also looking for this kind of alternative. So without any further delay, I want to introduce Ros Foyer, the General Secretary of the Scottish Trade Union Congress. And I just say a word of appreciation, not just for the warmth and hospitality of the Scottish comrades, but the work they've done preparing for this COP and for this meeting is absolutely exemplary. I've been to many COPs, and I think this is an example that I think other trade unions centres can emulate in the years ahead, because there's no shortcut when it comes down to organising this kind of work. So on the political level and the organisational level, we thank the STUC, and I think a little round of applause might be appropriate. I'm going to call up Ros now, and she's going to deliver a presentation on our agenda today and the thinking of the STUC around COP26. So Ros, we'll share.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean, and hello and welcome to all of the people in the room. I'm going to actually be facing over here because I've been asked to speak towards the microphone, so apologies for not making eye contact with all of you. But just to say that, yeah, this is, we feel actually we could have done a lot more to welcome people in, but we are literally just moving into a new building and hadn't expected to open it formally until next March. So we've sort of opened it a little ahead of schedule in order to be able to accommodate some of the COP meetings, and we're so pleased to have you all with us and to be able to contribute. So, as was said, my name's Ros Foyer. I'm the General Secretary of the Scottish TUC, which is Scotland's Trade Union Centre. We represent almost 600,000 trade union members from a very diverse range of industries and sectors right across Scotland's economy. And that includes many thousands of workers whose livelihoods are based in sectors like energy, like construction, like transport, and a range of manufacturing. And these are all areas that are directly impacted by the transition that will have to take place to net zero and the need for that transition to be a just transition. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to this meeting convened by TUED, Public Service International and the French Energy and Mining Unions, FNME and CGT. And today we will be discussing the trade unions programme for a public low carbon energy future and really looking at the work of the Trade Union Task Force in developing and campaigning for that programme to be implemented. The programme itself will be launched today on the 4th of November, and the STUC was very pleased to play a role in this task force. And I'd actually like to thank Francis Stewart, who's here, our policy officer, for all of his efforts to support this piece of work in the run-up to the COP. And I'm also delighted that we're joined here by a range of trade unions. I believe we have unions that are due to be here with us physically today from as far apart as Argentina, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Chile, France, the US and the UK. And online, we're also expecting to be joined by more than 30 other trade union organisations from up to 13 different countries. So we really are a truly international gathering, as this launch deserves and requires. And in recent years, we've really seen this whole concept of a just transition go mainstream. It's in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. Governments around the world use it to describe a range of policies. Corporates use it to launch their own just transition strategies and conferences. And quite often, just transition events are arranged with little or no trade union involvement. But we know that the term just transition was born in the labour movement. And for me, it's our duty as trade unionists to own that term and to define that term. Because for some, just transition is just about the transition. Looking at how existing institutions can manage change, perhaps by reskilling or compensating workers who lose out as some industries are wound down. But for others, it's a much more transformative process, one that requires a complete shift in the balance of economic and political power. And I'm pleased to say that for the STUC, we are very clear it is the latter. So that's why we're campaigning here in Scotland for radical interventions by our governments, both fiscally but also democratically. Central to our campaign is the need for public ownership and for re-empowering local authorities and communities to deliver change, whether that be energy efficiency in homes, our bus and our train services, or our energy system. Because a just green future can only be built on public investment, democratic ownership, and a strong domestic supply chain. And so as part of our demands for a green recovery, we will also be calling for a people's recovery. And there are three key areas that we're pushing because we believe these will make the most material difference to ordinary working people's lives. The first of these areas is in energy and infrastructure. A free market-based energy system is broken. Domestic energy bills are soaring and supply companies are collapsing here in the UK, which is leading to a cost of living crisis for workers. While large parts of our construction industry responsible for building the new green energy infrastructure that we need can only be described as corrupt. The scandalous collapse of Carillion, which held contracts with the Scottish Government and many other public providers, is just one example of directors enriching themselves at public expense. Procurement fraud, supply chain fraud, tax fraud and embezzlement are all well-known problems. Poor employment practices, including bogus self-employment, umbrella contracts, a lack of health and safety standards, and the systematic blacklisting of workers means that financial insecurity and health and safety risks are all too often passed on to workers. And meanwhile, price fixing passes on the costs to the clients, many of whom are workers and many of whom are public sector institutions. So we're calling for government to establish a publicly owned energy company and a publicly owned construction and infrastructure company here in Scotland to drive forward green energy development and strategic infrastructure while supporting high quality employment. The next key area I want to talk about that we're really pushing on is transport. Transport accounts for 36% of Scotland's emissions and has seen no real progress in emissions reductions in 30 years. But 29% of Scotland's households don't have access to a car. And with this rate being higher for women, disabled people, and those living in our most deprived communities. Now, since Margaret Thatcher deregulated and privatised the bus networks in 1986, bus fares have soared and passenger use of buses has massively declined. Apart from in the Lothian region of Scotland, and that happens to also be the sole region where we have a publicly owned bus service provider. And while there were 644 million passenger journeys in 1986 and 87, this fell by 43% to 366 million in 2019 to 2020. So our current system allows private bus companies to cut routes and raise fares with no regard for the communities that rely on them. And the alternative that we're arguing for, which is illustrated beautifully by the success of Lothian buses, is to take back control of our bus networks, to re-regulate our services, set up municipal bus companies and lower costs. This requires the Scottish Government to move beyond bus partnerships with private operators. And as the former UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Phil Halston, put it, these voluntary partnerships between bus companies and local transport authorities are actually a failed middle ground that should be phased out in favour of proper public control and ownership. So that's why the STUC are working on local campaigns across Scotland to take back control of our buses, with Unite the Union, who represents bus workers, as well as trades councils across Scotland, the Poverty Alliance, Friends of the Earth Scotland, Engender, Commonweal, Get Glasgow Moving, the International Transport Workers Federation, One Parent Families Scotland, and the Young Women's Movement. So we have a coalition here. And it's also why First Bus workers here in Scotland are balloting to take strike action, because our deregulated bus network means First Bus pay their workers poverty pay levels despite making substantial profits for their shareholders while overseeing falling passenger numbers, and this cannot be allowed to continue. And while it's extremely welcome that the Scottish Government have committed to nationalising Scotland's railways from next year, they too need investment. They don't need the 12% cut across the boards that's been proposed. So that's why Scotland's rail unions, who recently won a pay dispute with ScotRail after balloting for industrial action, launched a vision for Scotland's railways, a plan that could contribute massively to reducing transport emissions. Now, these two issues, organising around better pay and conditions and campaigning for investment in services, are not separate, they're linked. For me, it's these workers who are taking action on our railways and our buses who are the real climate heroes, not the delegates flying to COP26. Scotland's trade union movement salutes them for standing up to bad bosses and taking action for better jobs and better services for our citizens. And the third and final key area that we're focusing on right now is housing and the green retrofit. Almost a quarter of Scotland's emissions are associated with our buildings. We have some of the worst housing stock in Europe, with £1 in every £4 that we spend heating our homes leaking straight back out again. 613,000 households in Scotland are in fuel poverty, with hundreds of thousands more expected to join them due to the spiralling gas prices and benefit cuts that people are experiencing right now. According to the STUC's own Green Jobs research, up to 130,000 jobs could be created over the next decade in decarbonising buildings, with a further 37,000 jobs over 3 years created in building new social housing. But to create good quality unionised jobs and ensure that profits aren't hoovered up by the rich, we need a street-by-street retrofitting programme to insulate and climate-proof our homes. And while this requires national funding, we think it's best delivered by local authorities using their own direct labour organisations with national sectoral bargaining to improve their terms and conditions. That's why the STUC have launched our Climate Our Homes campaign, calling on councils to establish local energy companies and to upgrade homes. The campaign, again, is supported by a wide coalition and a number of academics. And this isn't simply wishful thinking. While a number of energy transmissions have been detrimental to working class communities, the United Kingdom's conversion from town gas to natural gas between 1968 and 1976 involved converting about 14 million appliances for 14 million customers, mostly households. Working alongside the 12 regional gas boards at that time, the government took a central coordinating role with a nationalised gas council giving the state direct control of the required investment. And it was a model that worked brilliantly.
Have you ever heard
Sweden's transition to
investment? What do you think happens when you encounter this here in the Philippines?
Sorry about that. We'll hopefully answer that later. Sweden's transition to district heating is another example which has enabled high security of supply, low carbon dioxide emissions, and efficient use of available heat sources. Evidence from across Europe also shows the key role of municipalities in energy transition, delivering publicly owned renewable energy and delivering retrofitting programmes. Lessons can be learned from these examples about the scale of government intervention required to ensure a comprehensive and successful street-by-street transition of the people's residential heating. A growing body of experience from countries around the world shows that publicly owned energy systems are not only possible, but are preferable to the UK and Scotland's highly financialised model of private sector dominance. At UK level, we would like to see the grid being taken back into public hands. And in Scotland, we would like to see a publicly owned energy company that invests upstream in renewable energy generation. So going forward, we need to emphasise the need to put public ownership of energy front and centre of trade unions' demands at this COP and in all international spaces in the crucial period ahead. But demands are not enough. Our movement needs to gather the evidence and build an analysis, a platform that can give those demands credibility. We need to shift the narrative away from the cowboy capitalism of free market ideology and towards public good. And we need to reach out to our members with this message and mobilise them behind these demands. 70% of the British public support public ownership of energy, And I think that's probably higher in Scotland, given our past experience and the way the Scottish people got behind the campaign to keep Scotland's water under public control. So I, for one, believe that this is a very important programme of work for our movement globally, and I look forward to reading the report of the task force when it's completed early next year. It will provide valuable campaigning resource for all of us moving forward, and it will contain all of the facts and details and examples that we need to deepen our understanding and to win the arguments, and crucially to get the people behind us, because it's that people power that will move our governments to action. So we're at a turning point to reclaiming our energy. If we're going to be able to deliver a just transition to net zero and avoid climate catastrophe, then we must ensure that the world's energy resources lie in the hands of the people, not the billionaires. And there is no movement better placed than the trade union movement to build that momentum and be that force for change. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Roz. Thanks for those fantastic words. Oh, sorry. Thanks for those fantastic words, Roz, and the rousing enthusiasm for this this program that we will be talking about later today. Oh, actually, I need my computer. I can't be too far from my computer. Thank you. I just wanted to move on in the agenda and introduce our next speakers. And I think in my organizing brain, which is a little chaotic right now, I forgot to mention that some of the key players in this whole process have been FNME, CGT, the Energy and Mining Union in France, whom we have worked very, very closely with on this project. TUED has worked very closely with, and also PSI, Public Services International, also a very, very close partner, and have worked many long hours in discussing and thinking through some of the content of the interim report itself, and also the program, which we'll be discussing today. And so I'm very excited to bring on our comrades from France, from FNME CGT this morning. And we'll hear from three of them talking about the process and the objectives of this last period in writing the interim report and the program, but in particular, sort of the context in France in which some of these fights and these struggles have been taking place in real time around preserving the public ownership of energy and against the privatization of the energy sector. So we'll start with Karine Granger, the energy advisor at FNME CGT in France. So over to you, Karine.
Merci Irène, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis ravie de m'exprimer et d'exprimer un peu l'avis de la FNME-CGT sur ce combat pour une énergie publique. Donc on va se succéder en termes de parole. Fabrice me succédera pour vous évoquer le projet Hercule en France et Muriel conclura nos deux interventions. Moi, je vais ouvrir cette séquence en revenant sur des événements récents et en vous faisant un focus sur l'échec des marchés de l'électricité. Alors, mille excuses pour les camarades des pays qui souffrent du manque d'accès à l'électricité, qui n'ont pas de marché, ce qui est en soi déjà un énorme obstacle à la transition énergétique que nous devons pourtant réussir ensemble. Mais je vais évoquer les marchés de l'électricité et rappeler comment on a déstabilisé des politiques énergétiques planifiées pour en faire des business de court terme, à l'opposé des objectifs que l'on doit atteindre collectivement. Alors, ces marchés ont émergé peu avant que la question climatique soit essentielle et prioritaire et de l'impérieuse nécessité du report des usages carbonés vers ceux bas carbone. Ils ont été justifiés par l'indispensable mise en concurrence d'un produit pourtant de première nécessité, mais dont l'économie est particulière. À tout moment, il doit y avoir un équilibre permanent entre la production et la consommation. Il y a peu ou pas de solution de stockage. Nous sommes donc sur une marchandise qui n'est pas comme une autre. Dans le même temps, les énergies fossiles ont commencé à être pointées du doigt par les scientifiques, les rendant responsables à juste titre de l'émission de la majorité des gaz à effet de serre. Et naturellement, les énergies renouvelables intermittentes ont été perçues comme la solution bas carbone. Le problème, c'est que ces énergies renouvelables sont incompatibles avec une économie de marché par leur caractère intermittent. Outre leur coût au mégawattheure élevé relativement aux heures de fonctionnement effectives, ce caractère intermittent les rendait trop risqués financièrement pour être intégrés dans ces marchés. Qu'a-t-on fait? On les a subventionnés et on s'est peu occupé des conséquences qu'elles auraient sur les autres moyens de production pilotables.
Karine, je vais vous demander de ralentir. Vous êtes doublement interprétée, d'abord vers l'anglais puis vers l'espagnol, et c'est un peu un enfer.
Donc, qu'a-t-on fait? On les a subventionnés et on s'est peu occupé des conséquences qu'elles auraient sur les autres moyens de production pilotables, qu'elles ont rendus extrêmement fragiles dans leur modèle économique. Les énergies pilotables doivent en permanence s'adapter à une charge et génèrent donc des coûts fixes beaucoup plus élevés. Mais l'objectif étant de libéraliser à outrance un secteur qui doit, dans les décennies futures, être le nouvel Eldorado d'acteurs majoritairement issus de la pétrochimie, on est passé outre ces considérations techniques. Les moyens pilotables étaient majoritairement détenus par les opérateurs historiques qualifiés de mastodontes par les libéraux. Le but était surtout de les affaiblir pour faire tourner la machine à finance qu'était le marché, ce qu'ils ont réussi à faire sous couvert de verdissement. Tout le monde s'est lancé sur ces marchés, les banques en premier, qui ont développé des logiciels de prévision météo pour mieux spéculer sur ce bien de première nécessité. Et on a commencé à voir les effets des prix négatifs et des prix stratosphériques. On a décorrélé la valeur travail, partie intégrante de la valeur d'usage, d'une valeur marchande. Aujourd'hui, le marché traduit principalement des risques et non un coût de production. Ces risques, autrefois assumés par les États et les opérateurs publics, se retrouvent dans la facture d'électricité des usagers. Et le dogme de mise en concurrence posé initialement montre que c'est l'effet inverse qui se produit, les prix augmentent. Alors, pour continuer la belle histoire de verdissement, ils finissent par inventer l'argument de la sobriété énergétique que nous préférons remplacer par l'efficacité énergétique. Pourquoi parle-t-il de sobriété? Tout simplement pour nous habituer à se passer de ce bien de première nécessité, car aujourd'hui, ils ont organisé la pénurie de ce bien. Pénurie qui sert les acteurs des marchés, mais pas les usagers ni les économies. Et on se retrouve avec un produit non stockable et bas carbone qui est indexé sur le marché du gaz et qui n'est pas suffisant pour passer les pointes hivernales, chacun comptant dans son bilan sur son voisin, pourtant souvent sur le même régime climatique. Se passer d'un bien sur lequel les usages carbonés doivent se reporter, ce n'est pas inciter à réussir cette nécessaire transition énergétique. Leur tort est de confondre vitesse et précipitation. Pour réussir la transition énergétique, il faut inciter à se reporter sur cette énergie par des prix maîtrisés et une continuité de service. Et ceci est aussi valable pour les pays en voie de développement que je semblais avoir oublié dans mon exposé, mais vous voyez que nous aboutissons aux mêmes revendications. Alors que la solution aurait été d'intégrer de manière progressive et planifier les meilleurs gisements d'énergie renouvelable dans les mix électriques, combinés avec des indispensables moyens pilotables, on a créé volontairement une économie instable autour des énergies renouvelables, qui sont d'ailleurs peu efficientes car les politiques de subvention se sont bien assises sur le bien fondé ou non des lieux d'implantation, posant donc aussi un problème d'acceptabilité pour les citoyens. On voit qu'aujourd'hui, nous faisons un bilan désastreux de ces économies de marché qui ne permettront pas d'atteindre les objectifs nécessaires pour juguler les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Il est grand temps de retrouver une propriété publique des infrastructures énergétiques indispensables aux citoyens et aux économies de nos pays. C'est une question démocratique. Les services publics sont un marqueur de démocratie et ils doivent être la solution de la transition écologique pour tous sur notre planète. Merci à tous pour le travail de convergence. Nous nous sentons un peu moins seuls et confortés dans nos arguments pour faire avancer nos revendications. Merci.
And yes, it's very exciting to be together with so many comrades who are in support of and excited about the public ownership of energy. Next, we're going to hear from Muriel Marcelot, Federal Secretary of FNME CGT in France. So I hand it over to you, Muriel.
Hello, bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis contente de revoir. Ouh, il y a un couple de son. Excusez-nous, on a un problème de son. Merci. Bien, je suis contente de revoir certains de nos camarades avec qui nous travaillons et avons des relations depuis de longues années. Et puis, je souhaiterais remercier Karine pour cette intervention et Fabrice qui va ensuite nous parler de cette longue lutte qu'on a menée au travers d'EDF et de notre fédération. À l'heure, effectivement, où les politiques publiques, on peut dire qu'elles patinent pour atteindre les objectifs de lutte contre les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, et on voit que les dirigeants de par le monde mène une course complètement folle à la privatisation de l'énergie et notamment au développement du marché qui ne fonctionne pas malheureusement dans nos secteurs professionnels. On a tous vu le dernier rapport du GIEC qui a clairement démontré que les changements climatiques ont pour cause nos modes de production et de consommation capitalistes. Et comme vous le savez, à la CGT, on défend depuis de nombreuses années et aux côtés des travailleurs notamment, une autre vision de la société qui pourrait prendre en compte tout à la fois le développement et la valorisation des emplois, mais également la préservation de nos ressources naturelles. Donc la question qui se pose aussi, c'est comment parvenir à tous ces objectifs de neutralité et en même temps en répondant à nos besoins de réindustrialisation. On l'a vu suite à la crise Covid qu'on vient tous de vivre. On a également besoin de savoir comment on va mettre les moyens en recherche et développement et surtout comment on va lutter efficacement contre la précarité énergétique. Je pense que c'est un point qui nous concerne tous à travers nos pays. Donc, je pense qu'on a besoin de travailler ensemble sur une meilleure planification, en tout cas, de nos productions, de nos importations et exportations, et sur la sécurité de nos réseaux, mais également de nos moyens de production. Et surtout, il ne faudra pas qu'on oublie la partie des garanties sociales pour tous les travailleurs des secteurs de l'énergie. Voilà, je vous remercie et je vais laisser la parole à Fabrice Coudour.
Bonjour à tous. Et puis, merci pour ce moment d'échange et de partage. C'est un moment essentiel à la construction d'un front contre les politiques néolibérales qui surfent sur la déconstruction des systèmes énergétiques et sur les marchés de l'énergie pour faire des profits au détriment de l'intérêt général des peuples. Cette démarche internationale sur fond d'une COP26 aveugle politiquement des vrais enjeux est essentielle. Pour rebondir sur les propos de Karine et puis de Muriel, l'élément principal est que les gouvernements de l'ensemble de nos pays cherchent à masquer, voire à cacher, les effets de leur politique catastrophique sur le champ de l'énergie. Pour preuve, en France, tous refusent de faire le bilan désastreux de la déréglementation du secteur de l'énergie pour tout verser sur l'économie de marché. À la FNME-CGT, nous le dénonçons et nous menons la bataille aux côtés des travailleurs et retraités depuis près de 20 ans. Et malheureusement, toutes les prédictions que nous avions faites se réalisent en ce moment. En 2020, et cette année encore, nous avons construit une lutte de grande ampleur contre les projets du gouvernement qui visaient à détruire ce qui subsiste encore du service public de l'électricité et du gaz en France. Ces projets, nommés Hercule pour l'entreprise EDF et Clamadieu pour l'entreprise Engie, n'ont pas d'autre but que de démanteler ces mêmes entreprises. Nous avons, dès le départ, anticipé les intentions des employeurs des entreprises accompagnés du gouvernement. C'est un élément important de notre démarche. Mais ce qui a été le plus dimensionnant pour nous, c'est que nous avons vite construit une lutte pour un projet et non contre leur projet. En effet, contrairement à la vision politique libérale qui se résumait à des réflexions dans les salons feutrés du gouvernement, nous avons su réveiller l'ensemble des élus dans les territoires et sur toute la France avant que le dossier définitif ne soit sorti. Même la majorité politique en place a dû prêter attention à nos propositions. Nos propositions ont été portées partout par nos militants, mais elles ont surtout été appuyées par une très forte mobilisation, des grèves importantes et répétées des travailleurs avec l'ensemble des syndicats de l'énergie et le soutien des retraités des activités de l'électricité et du gaz. Les élus politiques locaux ont été contraints de nous entendre pour certains, quand d'autres étaient demandeurs de nos propositions. Tous nous ont considérés et ont dû reconnaître tant la qualité que la véracité de nos constats et propositions. Ces propositions, tournées vers un véritable service public de l'énergie, mettant en avant la continuité de service, la transition énergétique et la sûreté des installations, elles répondent aux besoins et à l'intérêt général de la population. Nous les avons traduites dans un programme progressiste de l'énergie de la FNME-CGT qui s'articule autour de 4 axes principaux. La sortie du marché pour un service public avec pour mission centrale de la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique, un tarif unique et basé sur les besoins, une fiscalité de l'énergie plus juste et transparente sur les factures des usagers, et enfin, une solidarité renforcée et un droit fondamental d'accès à l'énergie pour tous. Après de nombreux mois, nous avons donc gagné et fait reculer le gouvernement français sur ses intentions, notamment sur le projet Hercule d'éclatement de l'entreprise historique EDF. J'insiste sur le fait que cette victoire, nous la devons à la combinaison de la mobilisation des travailleurs et retraités du secteur et à une démarche de mise en lumière d'une lutte pour un véritable service public de l'énergie qui répond aux enjeux de demain. Aujourd'hui, la lutte n'est pas terminée puisque les gouvernants n'ont de cesse de tenter par toutes les manœuvres possibles de détruire ce qui représente le service public. Pourtant, l'explosion des factures de gaz ou d'électricité en France, comme dans de nombreux pays, prouve que nous sommes arrivés aux limites du système capitaliste et de ses effets pour les citoyens. Le secteur de l'énergie est indiscutablement un point central de la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique, mais aussi pour l'accès à l'énergie pour tous les citoyens, comme le défend d'ailleurs notre ONG partenaire de la FNME-CGT, Droit d'accès à l'énergie SOS Futur. Les décisions politiques ne peuvent se résumer à des prises de position utopistes, électoralistes et court-termistes. Nous devons faire front dans chaque pays, mais aussi internationalement, pour montrer que de véritables solutions existent, mais qu'elles passent par le service public sous contrôle des usagers, par le fait que nous devons convaincre les gouvernants à prendre courageusement de bonnes décisions. Je suis extrêmement satisfait que notre lutte retentisse au-delà des frontières françaises et que le travail mené par la Task Force avec le soutien de TUED et de PSI aboutisse à un programme qui avance sur de nombreuses similitudes avec le programme progressiste de l'énergie de la FNME-CGT. C'est également une satisfaction de voir que cette lutte s'élargit de plus en plus et que nous réussissons à la mener collectivement. J'aimerais finir sur le fait que nous devons y croire, être force de proposition et croire en nos rêves d'un meilleur avenir énergétique qui répond aux enjeux d'avenir et aux besoins de tous les peuples. Et si les gouvernements tentent de casser notre dynamique, car elle ne répond pas à leurs seuls intérêts de profit financier, et donc qu'ils tentent de détruire nos rêves, alors n'ayons pas peur d'être tous ensemble leurs cauchemars et faisons de nos rêves une réalité. Merci pour votre écoute.
Thank you, Fabrice. Oops. Thanks, Fabrice, and thank you to FNME for your contributions here today, and also, again, to this process that you have been so actively engaged in, both on the ground in fighting against privatization in France, and also in this international effort to build up this interim report, this program, and this message of public ownership and democratic control for our future. We're going to now move on to hear a program overview from two unions, two people in those unions who have been integrally part of this process of developing the content of the interim report, as well as the program itself. Just to give a little context, we started early this year in putting together a task force for a pro-public future. So with FNME, CGT, and PSI, and TUED, we thought about who has been active in supporting the message of public ownership of energy over the years. And so some of those members of the task force included EPSU and FNMB, Unite, STUC, of course, OWTU in Trinidad and Tobago, who we will hear from later, ITF, CTAA, also who we'll hear from later, FNV in the Netherlands, and so and many others, Centro in the Philippines. There have been many active members of the task force who have been thinking and developing and making interventions and contributions as to how the report and the program should be developed through multiple meetings that we had over the course of the spring, and then, earlier this year, and then in July and August in particular, weekly meetings to kind of develop out some of the thoughts and the thinking, and how to really capture what we were, the message, the alternative vision message that we were trying to put forward around public ownership. And so today we're going to hear from Sam Mason, the policy officer at Public and Commercial Services in the UK, and also from David Boyce, who's the Deputy General Secretary at PSI, and hear from them to give us a bit of an overview of the program, which we'll put the links into the chat again. But to give us a sense of the content of that and highlight some of the, I think, the unique features and the things that are important to focus in on in terms of what's being highlighted in those documents. So I'm going to hand the floor over to first Sam, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thanks Irene, and thanks for that introduction and for the possibility to participate in this working meeting here in Glasgow, and also a part of this process
an important process in developing our alternative vision for a pro-public energy transition. As Irene said, I'm Sam Mason, Policy Officer at Public Commercial Services Trade Union in the UK, and we send solidarity from my union to all comrades at this meeting, those online and those in struggle and continue to be in struggle, such as comrades at FNME and CGT, and those right now in Glasgow. And it's been really good to see the support going down to picket lines there. I'm just going to touch a bit on, obviously, as Irene said, the programme and the context for it. And just the first thing to say is it comes at a really important juncture. Obviously, one is as a result of the significant work which has been taking place over the past year, which has been mentioned, and obviously more will be said about later, but also critically because it's the start of setting out the real counter narrative to what we see happening here at this COP after just a few days. And just to highlight a couple of things. Yesterday, Mark Carney, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, leading the Financial Alliance for Net Zero, an alliance of bankers, insurers and investors, said the money is there for transition. Net zero is the critical infrastructure of the new financial system. On the opening days of the talks, our wealth takers, Prince Charles and Boris Johnson, talked of building a global alliance of the private sector, again, corporations and bankers, to mobilise hundreds of trillions along with government spending to de-risk projects so that the private sector can come in. And this is a narrative which we need to set ourselves against and see the work of obviously the trade union programme for a low carbon energy future as the critical infrastructure we need to fight for, and that alternative infrastructure and message that needs to go out there. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look through the programme. We're not going to go through it bit by bit, but I just wanted to highlight a few sections, and David will come after and highlight some of the other parts. So the first one I really want to sort of draw attention to was really section 2, which calls for the reversal of the neoliberal laws and directives affecting the power sector. And this is really important because it's not just about doing what we've done and have needed to do, which is fighting the privatisations. This is about calling for an end and reversing those privatisations, and doing that in building and our knowledge and speaking in specific terms, so that we can build our collective knowledge and confidence of understanding how the markets work, how the system works in the favour of the privatised and marketised system. So I know sometimes the language can seem a bit confusing, or we don't really want to address it with things like around independent power producers. It's something I've had to get my head around over the years and try and understand. But I think we really need to get to grasp with these confidence. So as trade unionists, we can speak about them with conviction about why this is obviously not the route that we want to be going down. For example, in the ending of public subsidies that de-risk investment. And I think certainly in the UK right now, we see a lot of the public investment, which is very much going into de-risking those private sector investments, and that more transfer of wealth across from the public sector into the private sector. The second one is about enforcing, so you'll see it in section 3, is about enforcing a new pro-public mandate. So it's really set out clearly at the start that this is what we're talking about, and that when we talk about public ownership and democratic control of energy, it means a shift in the mandate of public utilities to a public goods agenda, an agenda which decommodifies electricity and includes the phasing out of the so-called competitive electricity markets. So again, in there, it's about stopping the further privatisation of the power sector assets and services, and ensuring, as it says in under sort of point E, that all resources and essential energy-related technologies are publicly owned. So it's about the whole system. It's not just about parts of the system or arguing for parts of that energy system, from the generation, transmission, distribution, and obviously the retail side as well. So do look through those points because they're really important to understand. And thirdly, and finally, I just wanted to highlight as well around section 4, which is about establishing a public planned approach to energy transition, because what we're seeing at the moment with this dysfunctional logic of the market-based energy transition, both socially for workers and obviously in energy bills and the current energy crisis we're seeing, and ecologically in not shifting and decarbonising at the pace and scale that we need to be doing, that there is no planning without some form of centralised planning across all elements of the energy system and those associated technologies that was talked about in section 3 as well, that we won't achieve the targets that we need. So they can throw out any target they like about net zero 2050 or even 2030, but without the planning and under a public ownership approach and a public goods approach, we are not going to achieve that at all. And obviously we need to do that globally and looking across national, regional and municipal public works programs as well, and mandating an ambitious economy-wide energy efficiency and conservation targets tied in with that. And obviously the interim report details the arguments and our logic around the case that we're making with the pro-public goods approach. So I'm just going to end really that, of course, we hear a lot of call from activists here and climate activists, which we're all working with as well, about the need for governments to listen and raise ambition. But I think it's also about us raising our ambition about what we're calling for and being really clear about that. And that is that clear collective strategy for a movement that moves us beyond a reactive fight in response to the diktat of private profit towards building a trade union response that confronts the dominant market logic to one based on solidarity, sharing and reciprocity. And I knew I was going to struggle on this word, reciprocity, in addressing the wider and intersections of social and ecological concerns of our movement. So I'll pass over to David now to follow on with some of the other sections.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks to all the people behind the scenes who are making this possible. There's a lot of work gone into this meeting. But let me also say that today is Energy Day at COP26. And Pakistan's energy minister spoke of their commitment to transition, even if they account for less than 1% of global emissions. He, of course, spoke of the need for financial support, which under the climate systems is not really moving. But he specifically called out the problems of independent power producers and their power purchase agreements, saying that the cost of breaking these contracts is prohibitive, and that unless his government has some assistance in doing that, these might be a fundamental obstacle. Now, he hinted at a process underway for that, and I'm going to suggest to the TUED team that we look into that. But we assume that the corporations won't allow their long-term contracts to be broken without big fines, as provided for under the WTO's Investor State Dispute Settlement, the World Bank's ICSID, or the Energy Charter Treaty, where companies can sue governments that act in favor of people and planet and threaten corporate profits. Look, it's part of the system we've been building for the last 40, 50 years, where government has been restricted to facilitating private profits and not providing public services, because the neoliberal ideology posits that the market does it better. So PSI has been tracking energy privatization for more than 20 years. It's no good for workers, no good for users, no good for the planet. And in many instances, and I think in the UK, you know this, it's not even good for the companies. Because they need too high profits, but it's probably best for the financiers. And this is what we're seeing at the COP, is this whole move towards financialization of public services. And it's actually getting worse and worse. But they have become better and better at extracting tons of unearned profits. So our work at PSI relies on the team at TUED, Irene, John, and Sean. and the unions working together to define the program that we're presenting here. At PSI, it connects our work on utilities, it connects our work on local and regional governments, on climate, but also on global governance, on gender equity, and it fits under our umbrella policy position of universal access to quality public services. So the trade union program is a distillation of years of experience. And so our position in the first section of the program is that access to energy must be recognized as a human right, because it really does influence every single aspect of life today. And remarkably, it is not under the UN system recognized as a human right. But declaring a human right is not enough. And we must reclaim the energy systems, large and small, into public ownership and management. It's a process that requires workers and unions, community activists and leaders, elected officials to move on a political agenda. So we, as trade unionists, must inform and educate our members. Not only our members who produce electricity or energy, but everybody who uses it, which is everybody. But then we have to figure out how to connect the labor movement with the needs of the community in order to create a political base that is strong enough to counter the very, very strong neoliberal presence. So Sam has outlined some of the background to the program, and you'll see in the first section, it clearly states it has to be a human right, and we're going to have to work at that in the UN. It references a public goods basis, and this has a whole range of implications, which we will detail later. But it also posits that we've got to be able to deal with energy poverty and energy precarity. And what that means is that even those who have access to energy, sometimes under the market system, can't even afford it. And that's not even talking about those who have to scramble and use various biomass to create their energy. But then what we see in sections 5, 6, 7, 8 is the need, for example, to ensure democratic governance and control. And democratic, by that we mean engaged, that we mean where workers and users are actually part of the decision-making structures, where there's ongoing democratic and public debate on the energy transition. It's not going to be an easy transition. We must involve everybody and bring them along step by step. And so what we'll see is that if the utilities are under the control and management of the users that they're supposed to serve, you will have different decisions being made. Now, one of the things that is absolutely clear, and we've seen this, one of the first acts of the privateers is to outsource the workers. They get rid of the long service, the highly skilled workers, and then they hire them back at half the wages from an outsourced company. It's unbelievable, but it's their plan, it's their system. And if they don't hire back the skilled ones, they hire back a lot less skilled ones. And then we start seeing systemic problems with safety of supply and safety for the workers. So we've got to look at that to protect the workers, ensure their skills are the highest, to pay them correctly, and to make sure that their health and safety is number one. Too many workers get killed in the energy sector. And finally, we've got to guarantee whistleblower protections. Now, what we can also see is that we've got to publicly fund this transition. It's absolutely essential. We cannot rely on financiers, on private equity who have exorbitant profit demands. We've got to look at public procurement. It's a hugely important aspect of government. We need to buy local. We need to source local. The other issue is the question of public debt in the former colonized countries in the developing world. This has to be dealt with. It is part and parcel of what we are calling for in our energy program. And so the final piece is around intellectual property rights. So what we find, and there's a number of studies that show this, a lot of the technology is developed based on the background work in public labs, public universities, but then it's commercialized and marketized by private companies. And we're saying that's not the role of intellectual property. We need to make sure that the best technologies are available to those who need them, when they need them, and not on a for-profit or a profit maximization basis. And one of the things that we've got to look at is to establish public-public partnerships on a not-for-profit basis between utilities. They have to be able to help each other and strengthen, especially through training the workers, but not only. And then finally, we look briefly at the multilateral development banks, and these are often the bad actors. They're the ones who drive through their conditionalities, austerity, and privatization. We've got to hold them to account and make sure that the public money that they manage is used for the public good and for the planet. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sam and David, for sharing the highlights of the program and also contextualizing it in the current struggles that and the narratives that activists are talking about and also governments are talking about currently in COP. So we look forward to more content and discussion around the program itself that you've just outlined here in this last period. I think because we got a bit of a late start, we're going to move the program around a little bit, and we're going to give everybody a 10-minute break right now.
We're going to open up discussion now on the program. One of the problems of this COP26 has been the difficulty comrades from the global south has had for getting into the discussion. So we've done our best to mitigate, to use the word as we use around climate discussions all the time. Again, mitigate that problem. We've brought Rodolfo here from Argentina, sponsored by the Canadian Union of Public Employees. You'll hear from Rodolfo later. I was going to do a sort of quick summary of the interim report. It's at the moment it's a 150-page document, and it's probably about 2/3 complete. So this has provoked a lot of discussion about the level of detail and whether this is going to be useful for unions. And we felt it was better to err on the side of getting all of the facts into the movement so they can use that document as a reference point and work inside their own organizations to distill down the essential messages, but also to find a way of staying up to date with the data. One of the things we've noticed as a movement is how difficult it is to separate out myths from realities, fact from fiction. And the whole neoliberal approach has been based on misrepresentation. And one of the things we've tried to do in the report and within Trade Unions for Energy Democracy now for several years is to ask the question, if there is going to be a just transition, shouldn't there first be a transition? Shouldn't there be a transition going on to a low carbon future? This completely changed. If the answer to that question is there is not a transition, but an energy expansion with more and more fossil fuels being used every year, then it's counterproductive and misleading to point to the growth of renewable energy and say, look, renewable energy is growing, therefore we must be going in the right direction. That is not what is happening at the global level. And the political implications for the trade union movement of that reality are too enormous to thoroughly discuss here, but they are part of the content of the report. So one of the main dimensions of the study of the report is to document that in detail. The second dimension of the report is to show where the policies have failed. We know that market policies are bad from a social point of view. We know it leads to unemployment. We know it leads to energy poverty. But it is perhaps the most serious deficiency is it's not leading to the pathway towards decarbonization. So all the speeches about ambition and the need to reach net zero by such and such a time fly in the face of the reality, which is targets are routinely missed, whether they were the Kyoto targets of the 1990s, the Paris targets, and now more recently, the updated nationally determined contributions. They are routinely missed. And it behooves us as a movement to understand why the distance between ambition and achievement is getting larger every day. So these are the things that are documented in the report. Yes, the report is often technical. We talk about carbon pricing systems, we talk about the investment regime, we talk about the subsidies, the feed-in tariff, the power purchase agreements, why that has led to a subsidies, an investment crisis in the project of decarbonization. And why I think we can all appreciate it's important to at least put some time into reading the report and debating its content is because we have, as a movement, been led up the garden path now for almost 20 years on the green growth model. The green growth was inevitable, the transition was inevitable, and jobs would equally be inevitable. And that has not taken place. But we can't leave it there. So the report then spends a lot of time going into what could a trade union public pathway look like in terms of the need fundamentally to reclaim energy systems, and we focus mostly on the power sector, back into public ownership. We try to dispel the myth that community energy, that small projects are somehow going to proliferate and become the energy transition. This is a very popular notion amongst the green groups in Europe in particular, that if we put some solar panels on roofs and communities have some degree of influence or ownership, that will lead to the transition. It is not true, although those ideas have had quite a strong influence in our movement. So not only do we need to reclaim energy to public ownership, but we need to defend public ownership of energy. Even though that public ownership of energy is often marketized by neoliberal policies, which means public companies have to sell electricity into markets like a capitalist company. And we also have to understand that ownership, the shift in ownership, while critically important, is not enough. We need a mandate shift towards a pro-public approach, towards an approach where we can actually drive forward energy efficiency and conservation without driving a company, a public company, into bankruptcy. If the goal of a public company is to sell electricity on a market, then there is absolutely no incentive whatsoever to reduce the consumption of electricity. That cannot be the future role of public companies. It cannot be judged by that criteria, which is why the program emphasizes the need to reverse the neoliberal reforms of the 1980s and 90s. It is inconceivable that we can renationalize or reclaim companies to public ownership without changing the architecture, the legal architecture in which they operate. 5 years ago, that was mission impossible. In fact, we were told by unions, our friends and comrades, that moment has passed, it's all been privatized, there is no going back to a public system. We said we have to go back to a public system, and now 5 years later, we're seeing the climate targets not being reached and the crisis in the current energy system is getting out of control. So what I'd like to do now is to get a response not to the report, but to the program that we're discussing, because that is a synthesis of the main findings of the report. I'm going to call on Zwanzima Vavi, who is in Johannesburg now. He is the General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions. that was launched about 5 years ago, and they are being engaged in a major fight to defend the public utility ESCOM from privatization in order to bring about a planned transition to a low carbon energy system in South Africa under public ownership and control. So Zweli, I'm hoping you're with us. I'm going to hand over to you, and we're going to hear a short contribution from you, comrade, because we know you have other responsibilities. And yes, over to Zweli. There you are.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, and good afternoon, dear comrades, colleagues, and friends from the trade union movement. And special thanks to all of you who traveled to Glasgow to engage directly, but also thanks to everybody that is linking in this discussion, a critical discussion for all of us in the trade union movement. First thing I must say is that, of course, SAFTU will be one of the movements in your family that will welcome the work of the task team for a public energy future, because it further develops the work that we in SAFTU, working in this instance with our biggest union in the energy sector, as well as in the manufacturing, NUMSA, as well as another union that for the purpose of defending the public utility, ESCOM has been working with NUMSA and with all of us in the working class formations that are progressive, the NUM. And SAFTU supports the program, and we have taken a decision to do so earlier in this week. SAFTU and other unions allies have defended the national utility, ESCOM, against those who are trying their best to unbundle and the company. If there was time today, I would have spoken in some great detail about how this journey began way back in 1997 of defunding, of commodifying energy, of breaking down ESCOM, and of bringing in private sector to provide electricity in the manner that undermines the position of the public utility and to provide electricity and energy cheaply to our people and to industry. We believe that ESCOM should remain a utility that is publicly owned, and we also support the extension of the public ownership of the renewable sector. And we are firm on that demand. And this is what the battle in South Africa is about. SAFTU applauds the fact that the program makes a clear and unambiguous defense of the public energy and the need to break with the independent power producers model. In South Africa, we are being pounced left and right. And the IPP model has brought in some few jobs and have contributed to, however, a financial crisis. And again, if I have time, I was going to break down for you how the IPPs are actually being funded through ESCOM, and in this big deliberate strategy to break down ESCOM and to undermine it, hollow it out, and eventually privatize it to the very same utilities that are being brought in by their friends in government. And these power purchases agreements are regressive and secure profits for the multinational corporations. The transition to a low carbon energy system is essential, SAFTU agrees, and will require resources. We accept that, in particular, in the case of ESCOM, through mismanagement, commodification and commercialization have led to a situation where it is in serious debt crisis. And we accept that we, even though we were not responsible for creating that crisis for the public utility, but we accept that we must bring to the tables suggestions of how that crisis of debt can be resolved. And we are waiting to see the US and the EU offer to South Africa. We always say the devil will always be in the detail. The announcements made here at home and made by Joe Biden offers us no detail as to what is inside this. And what we suspect is that South Africa will lose its energy sovereignty, and that will leave us dependent on the technologies produced overseas, and then it will not be just a just transition that we're going to be seeing, as they will pursue the agenda of using their companies to basically do as they wish already here in South Africa and in our neighboring country, Mozambique. The US agenda is there. They've discovered a large gas reserves. And clearly, when they say break down the carbon, the coal industry, and they mean replace it with what we have just discovered in Mozambique, which is leading to major wars and in that country. I concur with what the other speakers have said, that the public ownership of energy should be front and center of the trade union demands at COP26, as well as in each and every international platform that we get. A public energy future awaits, but we must fight for it like our lives depend on it, because indeed, our lives surely depend on that. Thank you very much, Sean. Chairperson, back to you.
Thank you, Comrade Zwedi. It's the work of the task force was very much informed by the struggle in South Africa. We spent 2 years working with SAFTU and the largest union, not just in South Africa, but the largest union in the continent, NUMSA, National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, on developing a response to the threat of privatization in South Africa. We're now going to turn to a comrade in the room, Rodolfo Kemp, who's the Energy Transition Coordinator for CTA Argentina. As I said earlier, he's been sponsored here by the Canadian Union of Public Employees. It was very active in the task force, and Rodolfo has been a very invaluable contributor to this whole process. So without any delay, Rodolfo, if you'd like to come up here, that'd be great.
Bueno, muchas gracias la invitación. Tengo una lectura para ser ordenado y para ajustarme al tiempo pedido. En primer lugar, quiero saludar a las compañeras y compañeros de este sindicato histórico y para las luchas de la clase obrera internacional que nos reciben, y para todo el esfuerzo que ha hecho TUED, FNM, CGT Francia y la Internacional de Servicios Públicos en esta iniciativa que es clave para nuestro futuro, para el futuro de los pueblos. Desde la Coordinadora Nacional de Trabajadores de la Industria, la Central de Trabajadores Argentinos, partimos del principio que la energía debe ser considerada un bien social y su libre disponibilidad un derecho humano por el cual luchar. Nuestra América es el continente más desigual. El 70% de los habitantes es pobre. Más de 30...
Compa, por favor, ¿puedes leer un poco menos rápido? Porque te estamos interpretando. Gracias.
Ok. Disculpen. Nuestra América es el continente más desigual. El 70% de los habitantes es pobre. Más de 30 millones de personas no tienen acceso a la energía eléctrica. y 8 millones de personas cocinan con leña o rezagos, mientras que el 1% de la población concentra más de la mitad de la tierra y casi la mitad del petróleo producido en nuestro continente se exporta. La temperatura y los eventos climáticos extremos se incrementaron considerablemente. La singularidad histórica que implica la pandemia por COVID-19 profundizó la pandemia de gobiernos de derecha, como fue el de Macri, como son los de Piñera, Bolsonaro, Duque, Lasso y otros. Por eso, desde la Central de Trabajadores Argentinos, decimos que debemos superar las dos pandemias. En este sentido, para la Coordinadora Nacional de Trabajadores de la Industria en la CTA, el programa de la convergencia liderada por TUED, que hoy se presenta aquí, es una oportunidad histórica. Estamos a 30 años de los tratados de libre comercio en el continente, en nuestra América, que en el área energética implicaron las privatizaciones y la destrucción del entramado público estatal industrial. Algunas de estas concesiones a privados vencen el año entrante, por ejemplo, las hidroeléctricas, y esto nos pone de cara a una lucha por parte de nuestra CTA en conjunto con todo el movimiento popular para recuperar soberanía y control sobre los bienes comunes. Es que fue la lucha popular la que nos permitió conservar en parte el patrimonio público en el área nuclear, de la cual soy un trabajador en la misma, y que hizo recuperar otros sectores estratégicos. La misma lucha que nos permitió derrotar el ALCA hace 16 años, junto con Evo Morales, con Chávez, con Lula y con Néstor Kirchner. Sin embargo, en Argentina, el esquema energético del neoliberalismo implica todavía una matriz con hegemonía de los hidrocarburos. El programa presentado hoy aquí da en el centro del debate. Para frenar el avance de los hidrocarburos y la carbonización en nuestra matriz energética, pero fundamentalmente para recuperar como eje vertebrador del sistema energético el patrimonio público y cuestionar la propiedad privada del sector de energía. Asimismo, el programa que promueve TUED y del que somos parte, además de converger explícitamente con el manifiesto que se viene mencionando, la iniciativa de la CTA para impulsar una política pública hacia el litio y forjar una empresa pública de nuevo tipo, binacional, con el Estado plurinacional boliviano, hacia un esquema regional, teniendo en cuenta y con esperanzas en los avances de los trabajadores y el pueblo en Chile y Perú. Es decir, promovemos la creación de empresas multiestatales, de propiedad pública y con directorios plurales, en los que participen las y los trabajadores, las comunidades de emplazamiento, las y los usuarios y los gobiernos de carácter popular. Como en otros países de nuestro continente y del mundo, a pesar del reconocimiento constitucional de la preexistencia étnica, histórica y cultural de los pueblos indígenas, en la práctica son ninguneados y sistemáticamente despojados. El desarrollo industrial debe estar asociado estratégicamente a mejorar las condiciones de vida y trabajo de todo nuestro pueblo. Particularmente, la industrialización del litio en territorio de origen debe servir como forma de incorporar a las comunidades originarias con participación plena en las decisiones, en el control y en la regulación. Asimismo, este es un modo de poner en discusión las legislaciones mineras neoliberales y elaborar democráticamente su modificación. En el día de ayer, en nuestra central de trabajadores, se reunieron los equipos técnicos de la Runa Sur con Evo Morales, y estas iniciativas estuvieron presentes. Este programa de democratización y propiedad pública de la energía que hoy presentamos junto a TUED se articula con las tareas del Runa Sur, le da encarnadura al manifiesto y nos pone en camino de transformación radical de la situación de nuestros pueblos. Esto nos exige ampliar la base sindical de nuestra central de trabajadores, coordinar mucho más con los pueblos originarios y otros sectores, articular más profundamente con centrales y sindicatos regionales, desde una perspectiva sindical, democrática y popular. Y efectivamente estamos avanzando en nuestra CNTI, de la cual yo soy el coordinador de transición energética. Hay una compañera del sindicato del cuero, de la manufactura del cuero, que es una compañera que coordina la relación con pueblos originarios. Y también avanzamos en la inclusión, en la convergencia en este punto con la Federación de Trabajadores de la Energía en Argentina. En este sentido, saludamos calurosamente a la compañera Bárbara Figueroa de la CUT chilena y de la CCA, esperando estrechar aún más las luchas de las y los trabajadores de nuestros pueblos hermanos. Ahora es cuando, hasta la victoria siempre.
Thanks, Rodolfo, for that excellent intervention. We're going to take one more one more contribution before we go to a break, because we want to leave time for discussion on the program and next steps. So we're going to call on Jan Vinde from FNV, the main national center in the Netherlands. Jan has been very active in the task force work and the development of the report. So Jan, we hope you can hear us, and going to hand it over to you now. There he is.
Thank you, Sean, and I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for the invitation, and we're very glad to see many of you that we worked on in the task force. I want to try to share a presentation on the screen. I hope it works. Can you see this? Yeah.
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, thank you for the confirmation. Yeah, my name is Jan Vinde, Vice Chair from the Sector Board FNV Overheid. That is the government sector of FNV. In case you wondered what's happened to his eye, this picture tells the story. So I thought it's perhaps good to tell. Yeah, first, a few facts about the FNV. We are the largest union federation in the Netherlands. We have about 1 million members, actually a little bit in decline and under 1 million now. We represent all sectors, and the government sector is one of the largest. We represent 90,000 members who work in public administration, the lower and regional government, national government, social services, water, 2 branches of energy, because the energy branch is unbundled in the Netherlands. Waste and urban transport and etc. The utilities belong to our government sector within the FNV since since 6 months or so, but mostly they are privatized companies. FNV and the energy transition. Our focus is just like most of the other unions, and the ITUC is on a just transition for workers. And we know all the slogan of no jobs on a dead planet. It's simply true, but I found that always a little bit cynical. But the FNV pays in its climate vision that we settled in 2018. Also attention to more issues around the climate crisis and the energy transition. As a large societal organization, we are very concerned about the unequal burden of the effects of climate change and of the costs of the energy transition. A study in 2017 showed that 80% of the subsidies, for example, for solar panels and electric vehicles, go to the 50% higher incomes. So fighting energy poverty is key in our climate policies. And perhaps it's actual, perhaps nice to tell that also in our climate vision of 2018 is that we put pressure on via the boards on pension funds to divest from the fossil fuel industry, and with recent success, because last week ABP, the largest pension fund in the Netherlands and one of the largest in the world, announced that it stops investing in the fossil fuel industry. And last, but well, I would say not least, but it was last and least until recently, is that we wanted to start a discussion on reclaiming public control over the energy sector, leaving the different options open. And well, this is where our collaboration with TUET comes in. We decided to join TUET last year after having collaborated already with TUET for some longer time. And we were very pleased to be invited to this task force for public energy future, a task force decarbonization, as it was called earlier. And we were also very enthusiastic about the manifest of FNME CGT about the public energy future. And I think this great initiative of FNME CGT gave a significant push to this whole project. However, as we made clear from the beginning, from the Dutch perspective, the Dutch reality is far remote from the goals of the task force to reclaim into public ownership the energy companies. As a recent report of TNI on the liberalization of the Dutch energy market shows, it confirmed the analysis of the interim report and earlier research of TUET that the market fails the energy transition. And well, the usual paradigm of neoliberalism, that private investors socialize the costs and privatize the profits. And we have a recent example of that. It is the fact that the Dutch state is sued for more than €1 billion by giant energy multinationals for the phasing out of coal. So that's also a reason that there is a growing conviction within the FNV that an alternative model is urgently needed, in spite of the fact that our workers, our members, are being part of a market system of energy. So that's why we support the public pathway. And why? Why do we support the public pathway? Well, first, because the neoliberal model obviously fails, as the analysis of TUET in the report shows. The only logical conclusion being that the climate goals of Paris can only be achieved when people and the planet prevail, not profit. For some of us in the trade union movement, this is only as a means for another end. It is saving the planet saves ipso facto jobs. So there it is again, the rather cynical no jobs on a dead planet. But there's another reason. The second reason is about promoting equity and democracy. And this is more intrinsically connected with the trade union movement. I will expand on this a little more later on, but first a small sidestep in history. It's not new that trade unions reclaim into public ownership basic services. Here is an example of the American Federation of Labor, adopted in its convention in 1896. The following resolution. You can read it here. I will read it out loud for the translators, but I will try to summarize it a bit. Whereas the influences of corporations are the most active cause of corruption in politics and of mismanagement, therefore be it resolved that the Convention of the American Federation of Labor urges upon all the members of affiliated bodies that they use every possible effort to assist in the substitution of all public utilities, municipal, state, and national, that are in the nature of monopolies, of public ownership for corporate and private control. So that's that's a pretty long time ago, but you can see that this is for economic reasons of corruption, concentration of capital, etc. But for sure, it was a concern of the trade unions at the time, the growing inequalities. And that's what I want to point out with this example, is the importance of public services in fighting inequalities. And that there is a long-standing relationship of the trade union movement, trade union community, with reclaiming for this reason utilities into public ownership. In these times of climate change and climate catastrophes, we have to deal with yet another type of inequality, and that is environmental inequality. So that gives us even more reason to fight for as trade unions. And as this French sociologist with a difficult name speaks of environmental racism, to indicate that nature is not politically neutral. He goes against the dominant view that climate change affects humanity as a whole in an indiscriminate way. And you can think of Hurricane Katrina. So inequalities of class, gender, race, and the environment are interlinked. The question that Q asks himself is, how can we bring about a convergence between the environmental movement and the workers' movement? And well, the language of inequalities, which is in the DNA of the workers' movement, does the trick, so to say. So adding the environmental dimension and combining it with the other ones makes a common language possible. That is the idea. And what I would like to add to that is that it is also crucial to speak this language of inequality, to reach out to our own rank and file. That's the message that I want to share with you here. And so it's not by chance that the network of trade unions for energy democracy is the center of this program. On the contrary, it results from a trade union logic. And so the claim and message of this trade union program is not only that the public pathway advances the transition to clean energy. Moreover, it does this in a way that promotes equity and democracy. But how? For although consensus about the right to energy and the public goods approach is on the rise, the trust in public institutions does not come naturally, or even is in decline. Now, that's why, in my view, and it's in the program, we have to reconstruct our public institutions, and we do so by introducing democratic governance and control and guaranteeing a high level of universal quality public services. The program for a public energy future makes a few proposals, and David mentioned these already in his talk, and there is no need to look at these in detail now. Anyone can read these in paragraphs 5 and 6 mainly. In general, what I look by as a final remark, what I would like to add to that is that we cannot underestimate the importance of workplace democracy in general. So not only for public companies, but more in general. There is a connection between democratizing, decommodifying, and decarbonizing the workplaces. And I think there lies an important task for trade unions. So, well, that's what I wanted to share with you. It was a great pleasure to be part of and to work together in the task force with FNME, CGT, PSI, and all the other unions. And I hope we can continue the good work. Thanks, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jan, for your intervention.
I'd like to welcome everybody back for the final 45 minutes or so of our discussion today. I hope the comrades out there in cyberspace, do people still use the word cyberspace? I don't know. All right, there. We have two more contributors, and then we're going to open up discussion on the program for a public energy future. And our next intervention is from Barbara Figueroa, she's the sort of environment officer, I think, for the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas. TUCA represents all of the unions in the Americas. That includes North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, as well as Latin America, that are affiliated to the ITUC. There are some independent unions, of course, and she's formerly a national officer of the main trade union central in Chile. So we're very lucky to have Barbara managed to get here despite all the constraints of COVID-19 and all the other constraints that come with trying to get to Glasgow. So Barbara, would you like to come up here and we can hear your intervention? Thanks.
Bueno, muchas gracias, compañeros y compañeras, por la invitación y muchas gracias por poder contar con traducción. No siempre tenemos la oportunidad, quienes no hablamos inglés, de contar con la traducción, así que muchas gracias por esos pequeños pero grandes detalles en el mundo sindical. Se nos ha invitado a reflexionar sobre dos preguntas. ¿De qué manera este programa por un futuro energético público ayuda a replantear las privatizaciones y avanzar hacia un control público de las infraestructuras estratégicas? Y además, si esto puede animar a nuestras afiliadas en la CCA a debatir el programa y a desarrollar propuestas. Yo haré lectura de un documento también para ceñirme al tiempo y tratar de ayudar a las traductoras y que no tengan tanta dificultad. Si pensamos en términos del sistema energético, un tema muy importante es la escala de este sistema. Hoy, los actores que dominan casi en todos los subsistemas, electricidad, energías renovables, hidrocarburos, entre otros, son transnacionales. Para países que no tienen escala en este sentido, y particularmente en nuestra región de las Américas, la integración regional es una respuesta para alcanzarla, creando así lazos de cooperación y no de competencia, que es lo que prima hoy día. Por eso, la integración regional está asociada, a nuestro juicio, a la matriz productiva. La inserción internacional y la matriz productiva, así como el modelo de desarrollo, son aspectos íntimamente asociados. Se condicionan o se potencian entre sí. Promover matrices productivas diversificadas implica pensar en el para qué y para quién. ¿Para quién producimos? ¿Se trata de abastecer las necesidades de las personas? ¿O más bien las decisiones sobre la producción están controladas por los actores privados? ¿Para qué producimos? ¿Es una orientación exportadora la que prima? ¿Está inserta en una estrategia de desarrollo? ¿Qué estrategias son las que dominan esta producción? ¿Están basadas en orientaciones del mercado exterior? ¿En las demandas externas que profundizan la idea de productor y exportador de materias primas? ¿O están basadas en orientaciones que buscan mejorar el valor agregado, el peso de la innovación y el desarrollo de los productos? ¿Están pensadas en mejorar las condiciones laborales y la calificación de los empleos? ¿Cuál es el tipo del rol de Estado que estamos jugándonos en este debate? Desde nuestra perspectiva, la matriz energética, productiva e industrial también están asociadas. Pero para todo esto y para transformarla, se necesita más y mejor Estado. Por eso respaldamos la propuesta que aquí se nos presenta, que se hace pública además en este evento, porque compartimos el énfasis de lo público y del rol del Estado en términos de la construcción, desarrollo y producción de matrices energéticas no solo sostenibles, sino que profundamente democráticas. Un punto central de todo esto es el control de la energía, que hoy no está en manos del Estado, ni las energías tradicionales ni las renovables. Dependemos, particularmente en nuestra región, del capital transnacional que se mueve con lógicas mercantiles neoliberales y no tiene ninguna orientación popular. La propiedad y el control público de la energía es fundamental para pensar en un cambio de modelo de producción y de consumo. Volvemos a retomar la pregunta de la energía para qué y para quién, porque eso lleva a la pregunta más amplia sobre el modelo y el objetivo mismo del desarrollo. Cuando decimos que hay que poner el trabajo y la vida en el centro, eso también debe pasar por la cuestión de la energía. Para la vida, para la producción y la reproducción de la vida, y también en las condiciones del trabajo. Actualmente, estas están usadas para beneficiar a las grandes transnacionales. En nuestros países, principalmente mineros y agroindustriales, también trae asociada la pregunta sobre el rol que tenemos en la división internacional del trabajo. No se puede hablar de energía para qué o para quién sin cuestionar también el orden económico y geopolítico mundial. Por ello, volvemos a insistir como CCA, TUCA, que no podemos separar estos debates. La defensa de la democracia, el repudio a las violaciones a los derechos humanos, la denuncia frente a la persecución de los dirigentes sociales y sindicales debe también estar al centro, pues sabemos que tras estos hechos y persecuciones está la defensa de un modelo que atenta contra los intereses de la clase trabajadora para proteger el capital, pero que también en regiones como la nuestra, las Américas, las maltrata doblemente, al irtar nuestros recursos naturales, la depredación de nuestros ecosistemas, mientras estas mismas transnacionales en el norte defienden el diálogo social. Lo que aplican para sus países no lo aplican en los nuestros. Por esta razón también saludamos la propuesta que se presenta, porque nos permite hacer causa común en la defensa de los derechos de los trabajadores y las trabajadoras. Un último punto en el marco de la pregunta sobre debatir la propuesta, sumarnos y complementarla. No cabe duda de que nuestra presencia aquí es una clara señal de respaldo y apoyo a esta propuesta, la que sin duda difundiremos entre aquellas afiliadas que aún no la conocen. Ya hemos hecho una primera difusión, ha hablado nuestro compañero Rodolfo, está aquí además nuestro compañero Daniel Gallo de la CUT de Brasil y también Pablo Somoza de la CGT Argentina. No obstante, creemos sentirnos también interpelados a pensar de conjunto mejores y mayores mecanismos de acción global, de acción conjunta, que nos permita generar intervención en la política de los estados y gobiernos que sea mucho más efectiva. Prueba de aquello es lo que ocurre en COP, donde por un lado estamos debatiendo, pero en realidad nuestra voz no está siendo escuchada. Hoy tenemos un desafío de unidad sindical, no solo como un anhelo, sino como la única herramienta que nos permitirá impactar en un escenario mundial, donde tras la pandemia tenemos grandes riesgos, pero también importantes oportunidades para evidenciar la necesidad de superar el modelo neoliberal. En ese marco, nuestro compromiso es a pensar juntos cómo construir estrategias colectivas, estrategias unitarias que permitan disputar con mejores herramientas el camino de salida de la crisis que surge con la pandemia, pero que se ha profundizado con las decisiones políticas de los gobiernos y donde el rol del sindicalismo será fundamental para resguardar el derecho al trabajo decente y poder hablar así de una efectiva transición justa. Y lo último, la transición justa también debemos demarcarla. No puede entender cada actor lo que le parezca mejor sobre transición justa. Necesitamos intervenir no solo en la transparencia de los indicadores, sino que por sobre todo en qué es aquello que define las fronteras de la transición justa, para que de esa manera podamos entonces construir estrategias también más efectivas. Muchas gracias por la invitación a la Confederación Sindical de las Américas, a quien me toca representar. Les traigo además el saludo de nuestro secretario general, Rafael Freire, y nuestro secretariado ejecutivo, y estaremos a disposición para construir propuestas, pero también estrategias políticos sindicales que nos permitan incidir en este tiempo lleno de oportunidades. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Barbara, and thanks for your the solidarity coming from TUCA is extremely important to this process, and it's great to be just with you in the same room and discussing these issues. We have one more intervention, a very important one also from Ozzy Warwick, who is joining us from Trinidad today. He's with the Oilfield Workers Trade Union of Trinidad and Tobago, probably the largest energy union, certainly in the Caribbean region, and in a fight at the moment to stop the green structural adjustment agenda being imposed on the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. And Ozzy has had a lot of input into the task force and been a regular participant in the work we've been doing with CHUED and in recent months. So Ozzy, we can see you and can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Go ahead then, Ozzy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Comrade Sean Sweeney. And let me start by really thanking the Trade Unions Energy for Democracy, as well as the Scottish Trade Union Congress, for having me here to give just a short response to the program, albeit virtually. I would have loved to be with my international comrades physically, not just for the meetings, but to participate on the picket lines. Very interesting to note is that COP26 Energy Day falls on Diwali, the Festival of Lights. So greetings to the Hindu community and solidarity with all the struggle for light, wisdom, and liberation from Trinidad and Tobago. Let me congratulate the trade unions for energy democracy, as well as the FNME-CGT and the task force and all the hard work that went into the development of this program. The OWTU supports the trade union program for a public low carbon energy future. And I wish to say that I endorse the comments by Comrades Favi, Kampf, Vinde, and Comrade Figueroa. You see, comrades, the program not only refines our analysis, critique, and arguments, which are of course necessary in confronting global capitalism and neoliberalism, But the program itself is a giant step forward because through extremely hard work, it developed an alternative path. In other words, the trade unions, as usual, are showing that indeed another world is possible. We do have to make a fundamental shift in climate and energy policy. There's no doubt about it. The energy market model is a failure, as Comrade Karine pointed out earlier, and as confirmed in the interim report and this program. And in the midst of this failure, the program is pointing a way forward with a more socially just and economically viable option. You see, the program goes beyond slogans and rhetoric. It is a clear articulation of a framework for how we can transition our human society, transition it to a more people-centered, people-driven, publicly owned society. Let us take this section on reversal of neoliberal laws and directives, highlighted by Comrade Sam. This is such a critical element as it confronts the international legal framework which facilitates global capitalist production and distribution of energy. It is a call for an end to privatization. There's always an attack on public subsidies for ordinary people, but nothing is said about public subsidies that de-risk private investment to support private capital and guarantee them profits. And this section in the report seeks to address that issue. The section on a new pro-public mandate, also highlighted by Comrade Sam, is also critical because, as would have been said by earlier speakers, we cannot allow the idea of public ownership to be one of the casualties in any transition, because it will mean that democratic ownership and democracy itself will become a casualty. The program makes it clear that we are not going to give way to private capital in a low carbon energy future. Comrade Sam made an important point, which is consistent with the overall spirit of the program, which is that it's about the whole system, not just part. Comrade David highlighted that the neoliberal ideology is no good for workers, no good for consumers, no good even for companies themselves, but it's actually only good for financiers. He reminded us that the program is a distillation of years of experience from on-the-ground experiences, that access to energy must be recognized as a human right. And going further, beyond announcing it as a human right, the program makes it clear that we must reclaim the energy system. And as Comrade Sean said, we need to also defend public ownership of energy. Comrade David pointed out that the sections 6, 7, and 8 is about democratic governance, workers and users being part of decision-making. And that is absolutely critical. He reminded us that we have to see that democracy and democratic institutions, or broadening democracy, broadening democratic institutions is critical if we are to achieve any sort of low carbon future. When we consider it as a whole, it comes back to my earlier point that at the heart of the program is the broadening of democracy to go beyond elections and parliaments and politicians. It is about inclusion, involvement, participation of workers and communities in decision-making. And it is about the public ownership of the means and mode of energy production and distribution. You see, comrades all, and I would have really liked to have been with my comrades in Glasgow. This particular program, it's as set out by the trade union movement, is a working class vision for our world. And therefore, as a global trade union movement, we have to endorse and stand by this and materialize it and socialize it and make it part of our work on the ground. In Trinidad and Tobago, for example, I'll tell you why this program is so important for us at this time. Our Prime Minister spoke 2 days ago, and he said little or nothing because the government is simply attempting to further privatize energy completely in this country. And therefore, this program comes as a tool and an opportunity to express to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that there is an alternative to that neoliberal agenda. Comrades all, we indeed must go forward ever into a public energy future and never ever go backward to private energy control, as the trade union movement must live on. Long live the trade union movement. Hasta la victoria siempre. Venceremos. Thank you, comrades all.
Yes. Ozzy, thank you for those words, inspiring words of support for the program. We've got a bit of time for discussion. Of course, we're hoping this program and the methodology and the thinking behind it will provoke years of conversation, not just 20 minutes. So we're not trying to rush through this process. Of course, we would have liked to have had more time to commit to it. Perhaps when the COP is over, we can reconvene either digitally or physically and have a really full length discussion on what we mean and what we're trying to do with the program and also the report. I'll just say one thing before we open it up for any comments and suggestions, both for our comrades out there who are zooming in on us and those also in the room, is that the program itself is not self-explanatory. In other words, there are terms in there that may not be familiar, or that trade union activists and comrades around the world are probably going to say, well, what is a power purchase agreement? I don't know what that is, or whatever questions they may ask. So we have to use it also as an educational tool, because this is the vocabulary of the dominant model of de-risking investments and so on and so forth. So there's lots of terms that we've carefully chosen to introduce into the movement for further debate so that we can have a discussion on these terms. But the document, the report, is a reference. So we will actually, at later stage in phase 2 of this project, we hope to be able to refer to specific sections in the document where these issues are discussed. So if a term is unfamiliar, then there can be further reading and discussion. And we invite all unions to set up any educational programs or similar seminars in order to discuss what's in it. But without any more from me, I think we should open. Why don't we start in the room to see if comrades have got, obviously through your devices, can put up your hand, and then we can also open it up to comrades out there on the Zoom elsewhere in the world.
Just in terms of process, if anyone in the room wants to speak, if you can actually come up here, it will help so that you can speak into the microphone, and then comrades and the interpreters can hear from you directly. So the floor is open.
Anybody in the room brave enough? I don't see the hands up. Yeah.
If there's no one physically in the room that wants to speak, we'll go first to Jackson Colnany from Unite.
Just put the camera on. I'm speaking to you from another area of Scotland, actually, so I'm not 1,000 miles away. But can I say, first of all, that I completely endorse the programme as a means of getting a united international trade union position, but also as a means of what Sean has alluded to as basically a reference point for further debate and discussion. Because I have to say that there are areas of this where we would go much further than what the programme actually says and be a bit more specific. So, for example, where it refers to public ownership, it talks about, research and development, waste management, and this catch-all of essential services. And for us, having had the experience in Scotland of the closure of major renewables units such as BiFab and CS Wind, etc., having public ownership of the infrastructure is as important to us in terms of building a new green energy industry as those other areas are for public ownership. And similarly, in the section on democracy, we welcome the references to the involvement of workers, the participation of workers, and having workers on boards. But I think it needs to go much further and to have workers on the ground in the workplace having some control and influence over the work itself. And therefore, the old notion of workers' control and industrial democracy is relevant to this debate, because I couldn't agree more with Barbara. We need to reclaim the term just transition. And for us, that just transition must be a worker-led transition. So that's my comments. But overall, I completely welcome the programme for the reasons that Sean has outlined. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackson. Sorry.
David Hughes.
We have David Hughes, who I believe is in the United States.
Yeah, thank you. Start my video. Yes. Thank you very much, Sean. I have a question about what's in the program and what's on the minds of other participants about publicly owning the energy source. Let's say wind. There's a lot of discussion about owning institutions and infrastructure and so on involved in converting wind to electricity. But I haven't seen a lot about wind rights. Right now in most countries, wind rights fall within land rights, so that landowners actually are in a position, and already in many countries are making a lot of money off of the wind sector. And it seems reasonable that a public goods approach should actually be radical in terms of going right to the fundamental energy. And if we control wind rights, then we actually can control all the rest of the commodity chain on down through electricity generation, transmission, and so forth. So I'm a little bit puzzled that there hasn't been more attention to the root source being wind in this case.
And it's also not taken up in that way in the report either, which is, of course, a much longer document. This is a distillation, if you like, of the report, but it's something that we should probably pay much more attention to. I got Jeremy Anderson has indicated he wants to speak from the International Transport Workers. Jeremy, would you mind coming up?
Merci beaucoup. Moi, j'adhère entièrement au programme, mais je vais vous donner, si vous voulez, la suite que David vient de soulever. L'entreprise publique, elle achète les terrains sur lesquels elle va faire ses projets d'éolien ou d'énergie solaire. Eh bien, l'État, si vous voulez, les complices. Elle ne facilite pas la tâche pour l'entreprise publique pour qu'elle puisse faire ses projets sur des terrains propres qui reviennent à elle. Ça, en premier lieu. En deuxième lieu, si vous voulez, elle encourage le privé dans l'énergie solaire, mais ils ne veulent pas payer le taxe d'utilisation du réseau électrique. C'est une grande bataille maintenant en Tunisie. Moi, en tant que coordinateur des affiliés de l'ISP et la Fédération générale de l'électricité en Tunisie, elle est en conflit contre l'utilisation de son réseau sans que le privé paye. C'est comme on utilise l'autoroute et on ne paye pas le taxe de passage. Voilà. Donc, en principe, on lutte et vraiment, il encourage le privé, mais les sociétés nationales, même l'État, même le gouvernement, il est contre si vous voulez, l'encouragement de ces entreprises publiques pour qu'elles jouent son rôle et laisser l'énergie en tant que bien social et un bien commun pour tout le monde. Merci.
So it's great to see you answer, Jeremy.
Thank you, Sean, and congrats just to all the members of the task force really for putting together this excellent report that's really doing the work that we need to kind of really develop or flesh out what we're talking about in terms of challenging the existing neoliberal orthodoxy. And I just wanted to pick up on the public goods aspect in the work program. And we've had a number of good discussions around this in the task force. And I particularly want to kind of highlight the relationship between the energy sector and the transport sector. So in terms of the approach that we take with what in the ITF we call our sustainable transport policy framework, we're very clear on a couple of things. One, that we need an economy-wide approach, and that kind of really takes into account the system-wide changes that need to take place across all economic sectors. And secondly, we're also very strong, clear on a public goods framework. And this is up until recently, this has been most developed in the case of public transport. And last week, we launched our sustainable shipping policy position. And this one of the major themes in this is the need for major investment in alternative fuels, which has a number of issues in terms of further up the supply chain from shipping. We're talking about ammonia, hydrogen, potentially methanol. And at the moment, the big issue with that is that those fuels are created using very carbon intensive methods. So in terms of kind of what needs to take place in order to decarbonize shipping, we need to have a significant or major overhaul, which the market has totally failed to deliver, of the renewable energy sector and renewable energy production. And it's similar when it comes to kind of public transport, in terms of which is more around kind of electrification and batteries, also with road freight as well. And also when we move on to in transport, what's our most challenging sector to decarbonize, particularly in energy terms, is aviation. But we see it's very important that we develop all of this in a public goods framework. We are also seeing a lot of talk around kind of de-risking and private sector investment, and a very kind of critical of what that could mean. So in terms of the policy, it's different with the positions we're putting forward, because these transport industries are quite different, but we want to tie it all together in a public goods framework. So looking forward to working further with the task force on this.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Did I is going back to the room now, because I don't see anybody online. There's still 60 or so participants out there. Anybody want to make a comment about the program? And we also want to invite unions to obviously continue to work alongside the conveners of this project, but also to sign on to the program if they feel they're ready to do that now. The unions who have signed on so far and really in the pre-launch period include EPSU and PSI. We also got the South African Federation of Trade Unions, the FNV we talked about, PCS and Unite in the UK, and I'm sure I'm forgetting several others.
Just as of
yeah.
last night, we've had the Confederation of Progressive Trade Unions of Turkey, and also the Valencian Inter-Union Trade Union.
Great. So there's no prize for being first in terms of supporting. We know that unions have their different processes in terms of getting that decision made and having that debate. We would, if anything, prefer to have a longer time to debate, and so we know that the decision is deeply democratic and fully considered. Any thoughts in terms of building support for the program? Seeing none in the room, I think then what we'll do, if it's okay with the comrades in the room and on the call, to ask Steve Smiley, who's the convener of Unison here in Scotland, to give some closing remarks. And Unison participated in the task force and is going through a process now of discussing the contents of the program through Matthew Lay, the Energy Policy Officer. But I'm going to hand this over to Steve to send us home or to the pub.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think first of all, so my name's Steve Smiley. I'm a member of the National Executive of Unison, but since we're in Glasgow, more importantly, I'm the Deputy Convener of Unison Scotland. I just wanted to say these discussions are really important, and the work which the comrades to Ed and everybody who's contributed to it is very important. This is about, we are an international movement. It's important that we understand and learn from the lessons across the entire movement across the world, and then arm ourselves with the ideas and understanding of what works and what critically doesn't work, so that we can we have the right kind of ideas to take forward about what the future should hold. And clearly, what nobody is surprised about is that the market model has failed. We kind of predicted that across the world. That's why we opposed privatisations when they were first mooted in the UK. That's many, many years ago, when we privatised our electricity and gas and everything else. In the energy sector, we knew it would fail. It would benefit the rich, and the rest of us would suffer, both as consumers and as workers. And what the programme distills, I suppose, those kind of lessons to say that we have to reject that market model. We have to ensure that there's a democratic control over energy. The point about energy being a human right, I think, is something which needs to be repeated and explained time and again, because people, I think, will grasp onto that, particularly at a time like this, when energy prices are going through the roof and the real threat of disconnection is looming large for many workers. We also have to ensure that the understanding that I think the point that Sean was making earlier on about we need a transition. It's not just about a just transition, it's a must transition. We need to transition to a low carbon economy, and that market model will not achieve that. All the evidence is it's going in the other direction. So we need to transition to a low carbon economy, and that needs to be a just transition. And all of these things are related. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a just transition within a market model without democratic control. So these things are all knitted together, and the programme quite rightly brings all that together. And obviously we are realists. We know that this will be resisted and opposed by the very corporations and the corporation controlled governments that benefit from the current model. And therefore there's a task for us as trade unions not to just have an internal discussion and, you know, take that position that we know what's better for everybody, but we need to popularise these ideas. We need to take it into our membership. We need to take it beyond our membership into the communities and build a movement for a public energy just transition. And the programme that has been laid out is the only way we're going to get that. So I would like to thank everyone who's contributed. Sean makes mention of my colleague Matthew Lay in Unison, who's contributed to that. We will take this into our own union, Unison, and hopefully without too much difficulty have it adopted as policy. Our energy section is an important part of our union, but so is our local government, so is our health sectors, all of which rely on energy to do their jobs, but also as consumers to heat their own homes. So it's not just an energy workers issue. This is in Unison speak, we talk about citizenship issues. This is a citizenship issue. This is for all of us. So I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed to the work that's been put into the programme that we have in front of us. Particularly thank our comrades in TUED who have led this work on behalf of the movement, and commend everyone to the work going forward. Before I send you home, a couple of brief plugs tonight. The COP26 Coalition's Workers' Movement Assembly is taking place at Adelaide's in Bath Street at 5 o'clock. There's an opportunity for workers who are in Glasgow. Unfortunately, those of you who are online will not be able to participate in it. I'm sorry about that. But for those of us who are in Glasgow, the meeting tonight, the assembly tonight, gives us an opportunity as a workers' movement to get discussing what are the key issues that are being addressed and should be addressed in COP. And I think some of the comrades who are in this room here should be, and hopefully will be able to raise these issues about public energy in that discussion. And finally, in terms of my echo, this is so good, I'm going to say it twice. On Saturday is the big demonstrations taking place throughout the UK and elsewhere in the world, but in Glasgow we have what we hope will be the biggest demonstration we've seen in many, many years. It will certainly be the biggest climate change demonstration, and there will be a significant trade union and workers bloc. So all of those people who are here in Glasgow strongly request and urge you to come along and join that group. If you haven't brought your banners with you in your luggage, then I'm sure we can get a placard and you can scroll the name of your own union on that placard and join the workers and others in Scotland in demonstrating to the people at COP26 that we need action. We need action in energy, and that we need that to be a democratic movement. So thank you for that. And again, thank you to all the colleagues from TUED and everybody that's here in the room and everybody that's online for your time today and all the efforts you put into it up to now and all the efforts you will put into it going ahead. So thank you all very much, and safe journey for everyone.
Thank you so much, Steve. Excellent closing words. I want to give you some homework in the next 24, 48 hours. I'm going to have my comrade Karine Granger from FNME CGT come in to give a final push for this homework of getting signatories. Karine?
Merci Irène. Donc moi, je voudrais vraiment qu'on lance un appel à la signature de ce programme dont on a choisi et pesé chaque mot pour que justement tout le monde s'y retrouve. Et ce que je vous demande, c'est d'utiliser vos réseaux sociaux, les syndicats avec lesquels vous travaillez pour essayer d'obtenir leur signature et faire en sorte qu'on soit le plus nombreux possible à signer ce programme et à porter ce programme. C'est le début, ce n'est pas encore une action concrète comme j'ai entendu pendant les échanges et qu'on souhaite aussi, mais on voudrait faire un communiqué de presse qu'on lancera un petit peu, que tout le monde pourra utiliser et lancer dans son pays pour pouvoir mettre en évidence ce qu'on est en train de faire et ce qu'on est en train de construire. Donc il est important d'avoir les logos de tous les syndicats qui étaient là aujourd'hui et d'essayer de persuader vos dirigeants de syndicats à vraiment s'engager sur cette voie-là. Je pense on va converger, on a un gros espoir pour y arriver et je vous remercie vraiment de pouvoir soutenir le travail qui est fait, même si le rapport n'est pas encore complètement disponible. Merci beaucoup et bonne fin de journée.
Thanks, Karine. And with that, I think we are closing the meeting. I'm putting the link into other TUED events that are happening in Glasgow. So if you are either here in Glasgow or online, please join us for an event on the 7th, where Sean is speaking, and then an event on the 8th and an event on the 9th, and they're all listed in the document, so I'm not going to actually go through them. But thanks again, comrades. Thanks again for coming in person and for joining us online today. And we look forward to the coming days and the future of our work together around this program and in other ways. So take care, everyone. If you would like to, if you are not in this room and you are online and you want to unmute and say goodbye or show your video, please do that, and we can say farewell to each other for now.
Au revoir tout le monde.
Bye bye, everyone.
Au revoir.
Au revoir tout le monde et à bientôt.
Bye.
Muchos éxitos.
Can you make it view?
Bye,
Gallery view?
solidarity.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, interpreters. They are. Thank you, interpreters. Amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Great stuff.
Bye, June. Luego, compañeros y compañeras, saludos desde Colombia. Hola, Lala. Bien, bien. También.
Hola, Moisés, ¿qué
Con
tal?
todo gusto. Saludos y abrazos a Irene también. Gracias por esa moderación y esas traducciones.
Moisés.
Hola, Susana Miller.
¿Cómo
Qué
andas?
rico verlo por aquí.
Mucho tiempo, ¿verdad?
Sí, bastantísimo. ¿Cuándo vuelve por Colombia?
¿Quién sabe? Vamos a ver.
Bueno, Susana, un abrazo.
Cuídase mucho.
Vale, igualmente, chao.
Chao.